My name is Clayton Tatro. I'm the Associate Dean for Instruction here at Washburn Tech. Thank you for joining us on this solemn but also celebratory day as we honor our veterans. As we get started, I would ask you to do a couple things for me. Please silence your cell phone and/or turn it off completely. It is my pleasure to introduce the Topeka High School ROTC for the posting of the colors.
Color.
Please remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance, led by the Washburn Tech Little Learners and the National Anthem by featured singer Charles Ozair.
Counter march. March. Color. Hope. Present. Colors.
that so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleam, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bomb bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Carry. Colors. Ready. Cut. Forward. March. Color guard. Halt. Order. Color. Ready. Cut. Color guard. Dismiss.
You may be seated. Thank you very much to the Topeka High ROTC, as well as Little Learners. Nice job, guys. You've got a future in that, let me tell you. Keep practicing, you're going to say it throughout your entire life. That was awesome. And then Charles, thank you. That was beautiful.
Hello, my name is Barton Holman. I am the chairperson of Washburn Tech Student Advisory and Activities Board. It is my privilege to speak for a few moments on honor our veterans on this day. The brave men and women who serve to protect the U.S. come from all walks of life. They are parents, children, and grandparents. They are friends, neighbors, and co-workers, and an important part of their communities. These veterans are part of Washburn Tech community today, and today we honor their service. It is one thing to talk about sacrifice, but it's another thing to live it. For those who have served and the families for those who are left behind, we can only honor their service and not presume to understand your reality. On this Veterans Day, let us remember the service of our veterans. And let us renew our nation's promise to fulfill our sacred obligations to our veterans and their families who have sacrificed so much so that we can live free. Today, let us remember those who currently serve far away from their families. Let us remember those who paid the ultimate price in defense of our country. And let us remember those who returned from a war with scars that will never heal. And let us honor our veterans who we have the privilege of knowing and working here at Washburn Tech.
As we begin our program today, I too want to add my sincere thanks and appreciation to our veterans. You all have done, and many of you in the room are doing in your service to our country, something that many of us can't. Something that many of us wouldn't. And unfortunately, something that many of us won't, in terms of the attitudes and the opinions and the perceptions of what many of you endured. As we go through current day. And we're finally starting to understand and appreciate more the sacrifice that many of you have made. Let me also extend my thank you, my sincerest thank you for your service. It is my honor to introduce our first speaker today. Retired Colonel Michael C. Slusher enlisted in the United States Marine Corps at the age of 17 in 1968, serving primarily with the Special Operations Units, including a combat tour in Vietnam, before transferring to the Marine Corps Reserves and civilian life. Upon returning to Kansas in 1979, he joined the Kansas Army National Guard and attended Officer Candidate School. He served as an entry officer with combat formations at the battalion and the brigade level, and within the Special Operations community at the team and selective assignments level. In 2010, he retired with over 38 years of active and reserve service, including more than 6 years deployed to combat and hostile fire assignments. Throughout his military career, he received more than 65 individual and unit medals. Colonel Slusher's military education includes Army Ranger School, Army Airborne School, Navy Combat Divers, and Salvage Divers Schools. His civilian education includes a bachelor's degree in public administration and a master's degree in political science from the University of Kansas. It is my pleasure to introduce our primary speaker today, an honored veteran, retired Colonel Michael C. Slusher.
Okay, the thing I'm going to primarily talk about was my last assignment because I found it the most interesting. But I'd like to make a couple of comments beforehand. One of the things that veterans always get anymore is we always get this comment, thank you for your service. Not good enough. Less than 0.5% of the population in the United States is involved in the United States military. That's a very, very big thing for the United States. You know, that's what we base most of our foreign policy on. That's what powers a lot of our domestic economy. What happens today, what I found in talking to a lot of these young kids, is that the parents get scared of what's going to happen to the kids if they go into the service. Here's a fact of life. If you're really concerned about the safety of your children, take away their driver's license. That's the most dangerous thing that can happen to them. The chance of something bad happening to you in the service, it always is a matter of decisions. All of these folks made a life decision at some point. For some of them it was a great decision, for some of them it was less pleasurable. For me it was a tremendously good decision. I grew up very poor, and what's allowed me to get a foothold in this country and all the prosperity and promise it holds is the time I spent in the service. The service paid for all of my education. You know, they gave me a tremendous amount of opportunity, and it was just a matter of me selecting to do it. I would encourage all of you young people, if you don't go into the active duty, go into the reserve components. You'll get the same benefits, and at the end of it all, you wind up with a retirement. There's very, very few industries anymore that have any secured retirements. The military is one of them, and it's going to change. But if you can get in there soon enough, you'll get a shot at that. Now, when I talked to folks about coming here and talk to you, it was like, okay, what are you going to give a speech on? I said, well, I don't want to give a speech. Everybody gives speeches to young people and everybody else, but not many people tell stories. And so that's what I kind of like to do, is tell this story. And for you guys that are vets, you know, you remember this term, no shit, this really happened. And so this is one of those cases where I had just come back in the spring of 2007 from Afghanistan, and that was quite an adventure. But I'm not a stay-at-home kind of guy, and so I began looking for my next opportunity, and wound up with a chance to go to Darfur. For you young people that don't realize what that was one of the great tragedies of the early 2000s, and it was a genocide in Darfur. And Dar is the land, but Fur is the tribe that lives there. And what happened was the government was running the people off the land because they wanted to repopulate it. Sudan, which is one of the 4 terrorist sponsoring countries, is the northern part is ethnically African but culturally Arab, and the southern part is ethnically and cultural African. But what the Arab faction in the north was doing was they wanted the land, so they enabled this group called the Janjaweed, which was an Arab militia, and on horseback, on foot, they began cleansing all the villages, and they killed about 250,000 people and ran the rest of them off that they could. So I went in on a visa with the African Union as a military advisor to the African Union forces, to this Lieutenant General from Nigeria, and as the sitting member of the Ceasefire Commission, which meant as on the Ceasefire Commission, my job was once a month, myself and a guy from British intelligence would get a big box of cash, $200,000-300,000, and we'd go out to all the UN camps and we'd meet with the rebel leaders and pay them a subsistence allowance not to kill the government troops. And so that was my first encounter with something like that. But the most interesting part of that was the very first stop was on the border with Chad. And out of the tree line from the Chad side of the country comes these 2 rebels. And so we're talking to them, and I says, "Hi, I'm from the United States Army." And he says, "Well, where's your army?" "I'm an Army of One," which is an old motto of the Army. And so I says, "You know, here's your subsistence allowance and everything." We got ready to go, and the number 2 guy says, I really need to ask you a question." And this is an example of the unintentional influence of American culture. And so the guy asked me, he says, there was I can't remember his name, but that's a byproduct of getting old in the military. But all he wanted to know is what had happened in a certain piece of American culture. And you know, this is the middle of the desert, essentially. It's the tip of the Sahara Desert. Anyway, from there, that thing ended up, and I guess basically because I was the only person from the U.S. military that could get into the country because of the visa restrictions, they asked if I wanted to go to the South. And so I went to the South to work with what was called the SPLA, which was a guerrilla army that fought the longest continuous civil war in the history of Africa. And it killed 2 million people and driven several other million off of the lands down south. Once again, the government was trying to get a hold of the land and the oil down there. This is Sudan that's in the middle here. In the middle up here. This is the size of all the land east of the Mississippi in the United States. Huge, huge country. And it had oil. It was supplying 5% of the oil to China. So we had a big interest in getting in there and having some play in it. Now, what happened was there was nobody in the South. There was a U.S. aid contingent and 3 or 4 people from the State Department. And that was the entire American presence. And me, an Army of One. And so they said, before you go down there, you need to go back to Washington, D.C. So I went back to D.C. and I went to the State Department and met with what they call regional affairs and talked to them, and they said, this is what we want, all this list of stuff. They go back to the Department of Defense, and I met with a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, and she says, this is what we want. I says, well, okay, except that's all lethal aid, and that's all against the law. And they said, you have this. Yada, 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 provide lethal aid and any assistance. Signed, George W. Bush. Oh, and you were exempt from prosecution. Good to go. So, move it up to forward slides. This was Camp Lemonnier, and this was the reason Camp Lemonnier is in East Africa is that's the only country that would let the United States put a base there. But apparently all bases up for sale now, because about 5 miles from Lemonnier is now a Chinese base. And so it's on the Gulf of Aden up in the northeast near where the Suez Canal dumps out. And so Lemonnier is on an old French Foreign Legion base. Worst place I've ever been in my life. They say that the Earth's crust is the thinnest there, and that's why it's so hot. And it is very, very hot. Go ahead. Yeah, let's keep going. keep going. Okay, this is some of the stuff in Darfur, and it goes back several hundred years in the history of the country. Let's go on. And I'm going to go through this real fast. I'll hang around a little bit afterwards, but I understand you're on a limited time schedule. This is Khartoum, and this is where, next slide. This is where I live. Now, obviously, you can't tell that this is a safe house because of this huge satellite dish sitting up in the back. And this is where we worked out of. On the other side of it was there was a house for the CIA and for what's called it was a joint team that did basically targeting, clandestine targeting. This is African Union forces, and this is what compounds out in there look like, houses for people. Next slide. Janjaweed. This is the most stolen vehicle in Africa. It's a Toyota Land Rover pickup truck. And the reason it's the most stolen vehicle is the one that you can actually put a heavy machine gun or a recoilless rifle and all of the other people you can put in it. And they drive those all over the place. Next slide. I worked mainly in the South. When I went down the South, I worked in what I call the clothing optional part of town. And that National Geographic says this is the largest remaining unexplored portion of Africa. And that's where my business was. And next slide. Next slide. Okay, this was my boss. This is a guy named Kip Ward. And he was the commander of AFRICOM. He was a 4-star commander. And his guidance to me was, he says, you can do anything you want as long as you don't buy surface-to-air missiles. That's a no-no. That will get us both in trouble. If you have trouble with anybody in my chain of command, you call me directly. Leave the ambassadors alone. I'll take care of that. I was on a set of what's called worldwide TDY orders, which I didn't require any additional orders to cross any border or conduct any other business in other borders, other countries. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Well, that was the ambassador's comments. The ambassador comment says, I don't know what the hell you're doing down here, but I don't want any secrets. Okay. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so this is what my daily schedule kind of looked like, and it's a little bit, I don't think it's not confusing to me, but it is to you. So it said, work with the general staff of the SPLA, work with other Department of State sponsored programs out there in the nation, coordination with other government agencies. What that meant was, because the CIA was in bed with the National Intelligence Service in the North, the South wouldn't let them in. So while I wasn't an intelligence collector, I was kind of the focal point for stuff. And next slide. But what the general said, he did want to build an air defense capability. And so I already had more than a handful of man-pads, manned portable surface-to-air missiles, and some other air defense stuff. I essentially had to rebuild their army. We set up a way to retrain all the generals in their army. I built a $40 million camp up in the jungle, and I went to Nairobi and hired 85 African mercenaries and flew them into the country in the middle of the night on leased Russian aircraft because I didn't own the airspace. So I had to sneak them into this camp. And so what we were doing was training lethal arms, weapons training, artillery, tanks, all that kind of stuff up in there. Had another camp in along the Ugandan border, and I hired Ethiopian mercenaries, and we trained their Special Operations Command, trained 2 commando battalions in there. One that was part of our deep strike air defense capability, and the other one was for another mission that ultimately wound up being trying to chase down Joseph Kony. Joseph Kony is the only, at that time, transnational terrorist in Africa. He was out of Uganda, and he's the one that used to raid villages and capture all the children and wives and haul them off into the jungle. We just about got him out of the way. They had no security assistance program at that time, which is basically the training of foreign personnel in U.S. schools. And so by the time I was finished there, we had the largest security assistance program in Africa with the exception of Egypt. Basically, the funds were unlimited because these were briefed twice a week to the President of the United States, and I was there at the right time and the right place. Anything I asked for, I got. Next slide. Here's, this is dinner one night. This is President Carter. This was all the diplomatic people were gone on their national Liberation Day, so I was the guest speaker to the South Sudanese Army. And then this was at a local festival for the promotion of one of their generals, and Smiley here and two spooks. Next slide. This is interesting because this is a T-72 tank, and that kind of made news in 2009, I think it was, because the Somali pirates captured a ship off the coast of Somalia, and they went in there to see what was in it, and there was a third of a brigade of T-72 tanks, a battalion of artillery, and enough ammunition for all of them. And that was our third ship from the Ukraine. And so it got embargoed and went to Kenya, and then we smuggled it out of there. This is on the banks of the Nile River where I built a riverine camp, and we were training a riverine battalion primarily to assist the World Food Program when they were trying to do relief up in some of the flooded areas where they have food issues every year. Next slide. This is a schedule of all the different training and programs and stuff we were running, which is very interesting because when I say we, it was myself, and I eventually had a foreign affairs officer come down from AFRICOM to help with the security assistance stuff. Next slide. Money that was being spent on the different programs, different types of things. Next. Program status, money. Next. All this kind of stuff. Next. 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 Okay. Well, this is up in the camp, the jungle, and these are some guys coming through. And you know what's interesting about this was they stopped one day and killed a bullock instructor and cooked him for lunch. It's one of those experiences that you couldn't pay enough money to get to do. And it was one of those things that, the point is, at a different point in my life, oh, and I'm a graduate of Washburn Tech. I didn't have that in there. I went through Mr. Lemon's cabinet making class when I first retired. I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. But there was a point in my life I'd be standing back against this wall trying to figure out what I was going to do. And in my case, I decided I was going to go in the Marine Corps in 1968 because I didn't realize there was any reason not to. Now, you guys can understand the irony of that. So I wound up in Vietnam 6 months later and came out of it okay. Next slide. These are some slides of the training and stuff, and this is a picture of the camp, and these are some guys working with the trainers, etc. This was my number 2 down there. He's now the military attaché in Kenya. This was a riverine battalion. This is interesting. Okay, so I'm holding hands with this great big guy, and the State Department never could get used to that. He says, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, that's my friend. That's what the culture is here." Well, this guy had been in jail. The president of the country had imprisoned him for 2 years because he thought he was going to stage a coup on him and take over the country from him. And then after I left, he wound up being their director of their secret police, of their internal security apparatus. Next slide. This is our commando camp. I've already told you about Joseph Kony. Next slide. Okay, that's it. Now, I got a mission for you guys. And this, and I don't mean to be offensive about this, but this is just the way I feel. One thing that I found out down here is a lot of these young folks really don't have male role models in their lives. And I would encourage some of you people to talk to some of these people some of you people to talk back. Because a lot of times really what they're looking for is just somebody that they can bounce ideas off of and get some guidance from your experience. I've got pretty good advice. And that's what I tell my children. I says, don't do the things I've done because I've already figured out all the bad things. Now let me tell you what will work. And so some of these older folks can do that for you. And that would be time well invested. That's all I got.
Colonel, thank you very much. It is now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Retired Brigadier General Deborah Rose graduated from Washburn University with a bachelor's degree in nursing and Wichita State University with a master's degree in nursing before she received a direct commission in the Air Force Nurse Corps. She began her military career at the 184th Tactical Fighter Group in Wichita. Her career includes deployments to conflict areas of the world, including Saudi Arabia in Operation Desert Storm and Turkey in pre-Operation Iraqi Freedom. She ultimately became the highest ranking female in the Kansas National Guard when she was promoted to colonel in 2002, and she is the first female in the Kansas National Guard to be promoted to the rank of Brigadier General. Her final assignment with the military was as the director of the Joint Forces Headquarters, Kansas National Guard. She retired from the Air Force in 2011 after over 28 years of service. Among her many honors is an honorary doctorate degree in public service from Washburn University and induction into the Kansas National Guard Hall of Fame. General Rose is an active member of our community. She serves on boards and in leadership positions at the Topeka YWCA, the Washburn University Foundation, and the National Guard Association of Kansas. It is my honor to introduce retired Brigadier General Deborah Rose.
Well, it is definitely a pleasure to be here. Again, for the second year. I don't think my daughter-in-law is here because she's fully employed and has an awesome job, and all because of Washburn Tech. So thank you so much. I have to tell you, as the director of the Joint Staff for the Kansas National Guard, I had a super person in my organization, and that's Colonel Mike Slusher. And I'll have to tell you what my nickname is for him, and hopefully it won't offend him, because every time I see his wife I say, "How's the King of Africa doing?" Because every time I talk to him, he's going back to Africa, and just hearing some of his story today tells me that he was doing a great job. But today, what I've been asked to do is tell you a little bit about what the military will teach you that you really can't get going into an academic setting. And it's from a website called Before Joining the Military. So the bottom line is employers love to have veterans in their organization. So what I tell you today might just encourage you to join the military so you too can have an opportunity to get some of these really super things that, that employers in the civilian world really appreciate. So much of what you're going to hear is not really a part of the recruiting signs, but they are benefits that will last you for a lifetime. The first one is military people learn more quickly. And why is that? Well, everything in the military is compressed because in academic world, they sometimes stretch out the information to fill the time. In the military, we don't have time to do that. We can't keep people out of the work environment for long periods of time. But I can promise you, we learn lots of things. There is a multitude of things that have to be learned. Teamwork. You learn to be a cohesive team from the time you enter basic training until you retire. And that's why they march in formations, that's why they chant, that's why they sing. It's all to establish and reinforce that the group has a collective mentality and you do things because of the group. You know, they say team does not have an I in it, and that's exactly what we are in the military. We are a team. So just think of what would happen if you were in combat and you had one person who stepped out of line and did something terribly, terribly wrong. Well, other people could die. I mean, that person could die, but they could also cause other members of their group to die. And when that happens in a business world, if you refuse to be a part of the team and break the rules, it'll cost the business money, and it may well cost you your job. And I can tell you, I've had people in the workforce who didn't want to be a part of the team, and that doesn't work out. So you have to sometimes yield to the better of the organization. Human resource managers know and expect that military people will work as a team. Functioning under stress. And as I was hearing Colonel Slusher talk about his story, and when I went into Turkey, I had a team of about 15 people, and we were going to a NATO base out in central Turkey. And you know, I'm thinking, and they wouldn't let us carry guns because, after all, we were on their base and they didn't allow. Actually, we only had one person that had a gun, but so you know, you're kind of out there pretty defenseless, and so you know, I can really believe that the stress of the military is a bit more than what the stress of a college student might be. If you consider in the military that they are deploying, there's long hours, unfavorable working conditions, sometimes unfavorable politics, and having to handle all of that with a sense of dignity. And perhaps it's my education as a nurse, as well as working in intensive care, where we responded to code blues, that's cardiac arrest, and having to deal with that helped me to learn how to handle stress. I have a bottom line on stress. If little children are not hurt, it's not a big deal, and it's served me well. Employers expect military people to handle the situation, deadlines, and stress without falling apart, freezing up, or cracking under the pressure. Attention to detail. There's a military mentality that says if we focus on the details, then the major issues are going to work themselves out. So it makes me think about when I was an aircraft maintenance commander. We have enlisted people working on aircrafts, and how they're guided to do their work is through technical orders. And maybe some of you have what you're learning, you have rules to follow. This is very specific guidelines on how you do your work, the technical orders. And as a aircraft maintenance commander, when somebody thought there was a quicker, easier way to do something, I would tell them to sit down, write it out, we'll submit it and see if we can get a change to the tech order. But not one of those people had the authority, or me, had the authority to tell them, just go do what you want to do. Can you imagine flying in an airplane where you had people just doing what they wanted to do or what they thought was right? There's no way. Employers know that military people will focus on details, they will do clean, thorough work, and they're going to save money for the company in the long run. So the last one is punctuality. So do you really want to drive your instructors or your manager, if you're working, crazy? Don't come to work on time. It's a terrible problem. You can't have people just coming to work when they think it's time to come to work. And even if they agree to work later, that's not the rule. The rule is you come on time. And in the military, if you're late, you're in trouble, and you're going to have to go talk to someone and say, yes sir, yes ma'am, yes chief. Somebody's going to do it. In my family, we're not just on time. we're early. And it's kind of ingrained. My husband and I are both retired military, so it's kind of ingrained. So these 5 points really have little to do with intelligence or academic ability, but they do say a great deal about character. I've sent many young people off to basic training, and when they've come back, their mothers have said, I sent a boy and I got a man in return. So the military does have some really great things to offer. I'm like Colonel Slusher. I'd do it again. I tried to join the Air Force when I was 18 and I was 10 pounds overweight. So I had to wait until I was 32 to actually get my commission. But it's been the greatest ride I could ever have in my entire life. For the veterans in the room, thank you all for your military service, and I'm proud to serve.
A week before the Battle of Bull Run, Sullivan Ballou, a major in the 2nd Rhode Island Volunteers, wrote home to his wife in Smithfield.
July the 14th, 1861, Washington, D.C. Dear Sarah, the indications are very strong that we shall move in a few days, perhaps tomorrow. And lest I should not be able to write you again, I feel impelled to write a few lines that may fall under your eye when I am no more. I have no misgivings about or lack of confidence in the cause in which I am engaged, and my courage does not halt or falter. I know how American civilization now leans upon the triumph of the government, and how great a debt we owe to those who went before us through the blood and suffering of the Revolution. And I am willing, perfectly willing, to lay down all my joys in this life to help maintain this government and to pay that debt. Sarah, my love for you is deathless. It seems to bind me with mighty cables that nothing but omnipotence can break. And yet my love of country comes over me like a strong wind and bears me irresistibly with all those chains to the battlefield. The memory of all the blissful moments I have enjoyed with you come crowding over me, and I feel most deeply grateful to God and you that I've enjoyed them for so long. And how hard it is for me to give them up and burn to ashes the hopes of future years, when, God willing, we might still have lived and loved together and see our boys grown up to honorable manhood around us. If I do not return, my dear Sarah, never forget how much I loved you, nor that when my last breath escapes me on the battlefield, it will whisper your name. Forgive my many faults and the many pains I have caused you. How thoughtless, how foolish I have sometimes been. But oh, Sarah, if the dead can come back to this earth and flit unseen around those they love, I shall always be with you in the brightest day and the darkest night. Always. Always. And when the soft breeze fans your cheek, it shall be my breath, or the cool air, your throbbing temple. It shall be my spirit passing by. Sarah, do not mourn me dead. Think I am gone, and wait for me, or we shall meet again.
Sullivan Ballou was killed a week later at the First Battle of Bull Run.
To all our veterans here, on behalf of Washburn Tech Advisory and Activities Board, the students and staff of Washburn Tech, we would like to present you each with a veteran of our each veteran with the token of our appreciation and gratitude.
Tomorrow all the things were gone, word for my love, and I had to start again, just my children and my wife. Thank my lucky stars to be living here today, 'cause the flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take that away. From the lakes of Minnesota to the hills of Tennessee, across the plains of Texas, from sea to shining sea, Detroit down to Houston, and New York to LA, where there's pride in every American heart, and it's time we stand and say, there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA.
My thank you to the students, Art, Student Advisory Committee. Lynn Dawson, thank you so much for putting this day together. As we look at the 100th year anniversary for World War I. In many ways, we've come a long way. When you look at our culture and our politics today, many of us know we have a long way to go. I don't think we can ever stop learning. I don't think we should ever stop learning. I'm impressed and encouraged by the life lessons from today. Colonel Slusher, you're exactly right. It's not enough to say thank you for service. It won't stop me from saying it. But it's not enough. We need to do more. Students, please find the veterans in your life. Reach out. Listen. Learn. Veterans, please extend a hand. Many of us need it. Our communities need it. Our children need it. Brigadier General Rose, thank you. I can't help but be encouraged by your lessons. For those of you that were here last year, I've started making my bed. What do they say? On time is early. Being on time is late, right? How's that work? Early's on time? Early's on time is late, right? As our students know, as you hear repeatedly from us, come to school, go to work, go to work every day, go to work every day on time, go to work on time every day, drug-free, go to work on time every day, drug-free, and learn to leave your cell phone alone. And you're going to have an amazing career. Veterans, thank you for your service. A sincere thank you. To the audience, thank you for being here. Reach out, extend a hand, extend a thanks to them as well. Do not let the appreciation end with this ceremony and with this celebration. Thank you all for coming. Please take the time to meet and shake the hand of a veteran. Refreshments are available afterwards. We appreciate you being here. Thanks for being at Washburn Tech.